Get that crying baby out of here. That's what the man said, casual and cruel, like he was commenting on the weather, while a whole room of crystal glasses froze in midair. Tell me something. If a room decided you didn't belong, and then 2 minutes later you were the only one who could help, would you step forward, or would you shrink back and pretend you didn't hear your own name being called? My name is Amara. I'm 23. I study psychology during the day, and I work nights at a white tablecloth restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place where the butter has a first and last name, and the forks know their choreography, you know what I mean. I live in a third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn with 2 roommates and a stubborn radiator. We split the bills down to the penny, and I was only on the floor that night because my best friend had an exam, and I needed the extra hours to keep the lights on. I didn't wake up planning to hold a billionaire's baby. I didn't wake up planning to hold a whole room together. But sometimes the night has its own plan, and it doesn't wait for your permission. It started with a small thing that wasn't small. Table 7 regulars in custom suits, dollar-sign cufflinks that told you everything before they said a word. The silver-haired one with a laugh that asked for company more than it offered joy. I bent to pick up a napkin, and he said just loud enough for the table to hear, as they'll let anyone in these days, "You must be one of those diversity hires." His friends chuckled not because it was funny, but because nobody wanted to challenge the man holding the check. I stood up slow, shoulders back, my mother's voice in my head. Walk with dignity even when they won't give you the floor. I looked him in the eye and asked if he wanted lemon with his water. He waved me off and told me to smile more. Yeah, that happened. I don't run to cry, that's not how I'm built. But I did duck into the locker room for a minute. Harsh fluorescent light metal sink my hands on the edge while my pulse counted time more honestly than any clock. One tear, then another, not because the words were new, but because of how normal they felt. How easily they slid into the night like they belonged there. I fixed my collar, pressed my name tag flat, and told my reflection, the sentence I carry in my pocket when the world gets loud. Dignity doesn't wait for justice. Sometimes you bring it with you. Then I stepped back out. The hum of the dining room swallowed me the way it always does, soft jazz, low voices, the faint clink of silver on porcelain, and then I heard it. A whimper that turned into a siren. If you've ever worked a floor like that, you know some noise gets absorbed, but this wasn't that. This was raw and panicked, the kind of crying that rattles ribs. By the time the lobster risotto landed on table 9, people were shifting in their seats, like the sound was a personal insult. A couple asked to be moved to the patio, even though it was drizzling. The jazz started to feel like a bad joke, and the air went thin. That's when I saw him. Richard Langston. If you read those lists, you've seen his name. Billionaire CEO, boardroom legend, a stare that breaks negotiations in half. He didn't look like that. He looked like a father whose world had fallen into pieces he didn't have the instructions for. His son Theo, not even a year old, was red-faced, fists clenched, screaming from somewhere deeper than discomfort. Sweat gathered at the collar of a suit that probably cost more than my rent. His eyes were red around the edges. His hands moved in that careful way of people trying to steady something they can't name. Pacifier, no. Bottle, no. The assistant under the table playing Mozart on her phone like science would save them, and the baby got louder like the song was a personal offense. Here's what most of the room didn't know, and what I could feel from 10 feet away. That baby wasn't being difficult. He was afraid. You learn the difference when you spend summers at a children's grief camp, when you hold toddlers who can't explain the thunder inside their chests, when you talk 8-year-olds through panic attacks with nothing but your voice and your breath. I learned that bodies make maps long before minds can read them, and sometimes the smallest bodies carry the heaviest weather. The manager caught my eye and shook his head from behind the bar. Not your table. Amara protocol policy. The rules that keep a place polished, but not always human. But when Richard looked up, I didn't see a billionaire. I saw a man drowning in a room full of people who didn't want to get their shoes wet. He didn't say please, he didn't need to, his eyes asked, and my body moved before my brain could talk me out of it. I walked over slow, not rushing. No big gestures, just presence. I crouched beside the high chair and said, "Let me try." Quiet like a library, not a show. No baby talk, no bright sounds, no performance. I held out my arms. Theo leaned in. That little lean kids do when your breath and theirs have already started a conversation. I gathered him cheek to my shoulder, one hand on his head, the other a steady anchor on his back, and I matched my breath to his even when it made no sense at first. In, out, in, out. I let him borrow my calm. The room held its breath with us. Then it happened. Silence. Not the tense silence people make to look polite. Not the awkward kind, where everyone grabs their water glass like they forgot how to swallow. A soft quiet, the kind that settles like a blanket at the end of a cold day. Theo hiccuped twice, then melted into sleep like he'd found home in a stranger's arms. A whisper near the door. Oh my God. The head chef opened the kitchen door and just watched, no order to bark, no critique, just a man remembering what tenderness looks like. Pause. 2 words. Pattern interrupt. Presence wins. I could feel the room's temperature change, awe, mixing with discomfort, admiration, tangled with the thing nobody likes to name. A woman in a silk dress leaned toward her husband. She must have been a nanny before that kind of touch doesn't come from nowhere. At table 7, Silver Hair chuckled. Of course, kids calmed down for the help. Laughter again, bigger this time, like everyone was relieved the universe had snapped back into a shape that made sense to them. Richard stood a few minutes later, not the stride of a man used to being followed, more like someone stepping onto a frozen lake praying the ice will hold. He stopped a couple feet away, cleared his throat. Thank you. I adjusted Theo so his head was supported. You're welcome. He looked at his son like the crying had written a map across his face and he'd finally learned the legend. She's been gone 3 months, he said almost to himself. His mom. It's been hard. I said I was sorry and meant it. Loss doesn't follow a schedule. He asked my name. I told him it means grace. He nodded like a dot connected in his chest he didn't know was there. If it were you, what would you have done next? Handed the baby back and disappeared, like you hadn't just witnessed a miracle or said the thing that might change a life. I didn't try to be profound. Kids don't need much, I told him. They just need to know someone won't leave when it gets loud. He blinked, and for the first time that night, the ice around his eyes cracked. We closed late. I rolled silverware, wiped stations, let my body perform the small rituals that tell your mind it's time to let go. I figured the night was over. But when I brought menus to the host stand, he was still there by the coat-check jacket over one arm, his son asleep in the stroller, looking less like a headline and more like a man holding pieces he didn't know how to fit. I'm sorry if I made anything awkward, he said. You didn't, not compared to everything else tonight. He half laughed, half exhaled, and then asked me a question I didn't expect. You handled him like you've done it 100 times. That wasn't just instinct, was it? Sometimes the truth steps forward before you can edit it smaller. My mom was a nurse, mostly hospice, and at night she watched kids in our building. A lot of them had parents working double shifts. I helped. I learned early how to hold a crying child, how to breathe slow enough that they start breathing with you. She passed last year. COVID complications. By the time they took her seriously, it was too late. He looked at Theo and tightened his grip on the stroller handle like that could fix the world. I carry her with me, I said. Every time I help somebody breathe again. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. The next morning, the manager called. First, we're proud of your initiative, but please remember protocol, please remember chain of command. I said I remembered. An hour later, the restaurant line rang again, voice too bright like a smile you can hear. Maison Lennox, this is Troy. Hold, please. Then a voice I recognized, this is Richard Langston. I'd like to speak with the young woman who helped me last night. I could feel the pause through the phone, the mental math of policy and power. I'm sorry, sir, we don't give out employee contact info, but I can pass along a message. That won't be necessary, he said. I'd like to offer her a position. Silence, the kind that says nobody wrote a script for this. A position. Yes. As a full-time caregiver for my son. And the manager, the same man who told me not your table, the same one who calls me part of our diversity initiative when it looks good on a brochure, suddenly remembered how valued I was. We've invested in training her, he said. Richard's voice sharpened, not loud, just steel, and yet last night you tried to stop her from helping me because she didn't fit your picture of the right kind of help. That was the twist. Not just the offer, but the instant the room from last night reached into daylight and asked everyone to declare what mattered more, policy or people appearance or truth. Troy cleared his throat and said he'd pass along the message. She already made a decision last night, Richard said, and hung up. That afternoon, he came back to the restaurant. No entourage, no PR team, just Theo in a stroller and a sealed envelope. Full-time salary benefits, flexible hours, tuition support. If I kept studying, I told him I needed to think because money can feel like rescue when you don't have it, and I've learned to add another question. Is this purpose? I took the train to my mother's grave, sat on the grass, told her everything, asked for a nudge. The wind lifted the little ribbon tied to her flowers like a yes that didn't need words. I called that night and said I'd do it. The first morning at the penthouse felt like walking into a museum that forgot people lived there. White glass gray, clean enough to make noise feel like a crime. Richard met me at the door tie, but no armor. Real coffee this time, not the boardroom kind. I laughed and declined. Theo crawled to me before I sat down, grabbed the lace on my sneaker, looked up like he'd been waiting since Tuesday. You made an impression, Richard said. So did he, I told him, scooping the baby like my arms had been built for the job. Grief, in a place like that, doesn't echo, it pools. It sits in the empty side of a bed in the clean baby clothes folded so neatly they might never get worn, in the pause after a question where a different voice used to answer. Healing doesn't announce itself, it hums under everything. The weight of a baby asleep on your shoulder. The soft laugh that sneaks out when he bangs 2 blocks together like he invented thunder. We found a rhythm morning walks in a small park. Nobody posts nap times that turned into tiny seminars where I taught a billionaire that you can't out-logic a nervous system. Co-regulation. I said bodies map each other. You meet the fear where it is and offer it a different song. He listened. He asked, not like a boss buying expertise, but like a father trying to earn it. A corner of the living room turned into a reading nook. One book at a time, toys started staying out, without apology. Richard loosened his tie and got down on the floor, without looking like he needed permission. He watched me watch Theo, copied the way I hummed when the baby's breath went ragged, learned the rhythm of the hold. One afternoon with the city painted in the windows, Theo pushed up, negotiated with gravity, and took 3 steps toward me. I didn't plan to cry. I cried anyway. You've changed everything, Richard said from the kitchen island. No, I said, you just stopped running from it. Do you think that's fair, by the way the world expects certain women to hold everything together for free and then calls it a gift when they finally get paid? Be honest in the comments. Because this is where some folks say Cinderella and others say system, and I think both stories share a wall. We didn't make speeches about race in that apartment, but don't think I wasn't aware of the picture. A young black woman from Newark carrying the weight thought of a wealthy white family's grief because she knows how. A miracle and a mirror at the same time. Word got around. Some regulars whispered that I'd leveraged a moment like I'd pulled a con with a heartbeat. A couple of people who never bothered to learn my name suddenly warned me about power dynamics and proximity, like I hadn't been doing my own math since middle school. In the elevator one night, a woman smiled a careful smile and said, "It's so nice he rescued you." I looked at Theo's fingers wrapped around mine and said, "Actually, we rescued each other. If it were you, would you see it that way? Do you think that's fair?" I went back to the restaurant once to pick up my last check. Silver Hair was there. Table 7 called me sweetheart and said he was glad I'd found my calling, like he'd named it for me. I stood a beat longer than polite, then said, "My calling was the same the night you laughed at me, you just couldn't see it yet." I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. Dignity doesn't wait for justice, it walks past and keeps going. A few weeks later, during nap time, Richard asked what I wanted after I graduated, not a job, a life. I told him the dream without shrinking it. A center for kids like Theo, kids who lost something too early and don't have the words yet. A place where breath and play and truth are the curriculum, where single dads and grandmothers and big sisters learn how to be the steady when everything shakes. He didn't do that "you're so sweet" smile people use on young women with big plans. He went quiet the way people do when they're working. "We'll make that happen," he said. Not as a favor, as a promise. Here's the part that might split the room. When the sign goes up and it's good and it's real and it changes lives, some people will call it paternalism. With better branding, some will call me lucky, like they're patting me on the head. Some will say, "This is what it looks like when power actually listens." And others will say, "It shouldn't have taken a viral night in a fancy room for anybody to care." And you know what? All of that can be true at once. The night a waitress quieted a billionaire's baby shouldn't be the reason a neighborhood gets the grief support it deserves. But sometimes the door you didn't want opens the hallway you need. So let me leave you with the thing that keeps me honest. We love the stories where the overlooked person saves the day, the waitress who calms the room, the nanny who knows more than the board, the woman who turns presence into peace. But what do we owe the people who hold us together before we notice them? Is applause enough? Is a check enough? Or is the real work to change the rooms so the next Amara doesn't have to carry a whole night on her shoulders to be seen? If this story moved, you don't just scroll past. Tell me what you would have done at table 7. Argue with me if you need to talk about power and presence and who gets paid to hold the world together. Drop where you're watching from and the name of one person who's been your steady when it got loud. Share this with someone in the thick of it who needs to know calm is contagious. And if you want more true-to-life stories that make you feel something real, hit like, hit subscribe, and tell me your story too. We're not done with what matters, not even close.